J. Krishnamurti represents the very heart of Vedanta, the very soul of Vedanta. Now, this is the very interesting part about Vedanta. Often, it's the people who don't openly identify with its philosophy, but who live it, who are closer to it than the so-called custodians of Vedanta. In my personal experience, I have seen Vedanta lived more fully in people who are not belonging to particular institutions and so on. Simply because Vedanta, first of all, requires you to sacrifice the baggage, the outer markings of religion, of institutions, and so on. If you have those with you, you are actually not Vedantist in the true sense. The Vedanta of the Ashtavakra Gita, the Vedanta of the Yog Vasisht, the Vedanta of the Upanishads has got absolutely nothing to do with outer symbolism. And particularly Advaita Vedanta. It is, first of all, a negation of all these nonsensical markings of particular monkhoods, particular institutionalized, monopolized views, which rely on a very large Sanskrit lexicon of Vedanta, but that is not Vedanta at all. That is just a very small intellectualized content of Vedanta. The mystical part of Vedanta belongs to people such as J. Krishnamurti. You see, Krishnamurti used to say that bliss, true joy is not outside yourself, it is within you. Now, this is the ultimate Vedantic statement. In this statement itself, you can understand the quality of Vedanta that J. Krishnamurti stood for. He consciously avoided using the jargon of Vedanta and also the jargon of the Theosophical Society which he grew up amidst. You see, Annie Besant was a great lady. She took Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society and transformed it into a very credible organization. She was a woman of many parts, exceedingly dynamic. She understood the core not only of Vedanta, but of Tibetan Buddhism, of Tantra philosophy, of Mahamudra, of Taoism, and broadly Indic influenced spiritual paths in general. Besides that, she was also a great fighter for the rights of Indians during the colonial times. She is, in fact, an Indian legend. And of course, she was famous when she was in England for rejecting George Bernard Shaw's one singular proposal for marriage. But that's the way she was. And she and Leadbeater, they handpicked J. Krishnamurti. And J. Krishnamurti eventually did what Vedanta is supposed to do. He negated his position as a world teacher, but he lived it. And he never externally marked himself by a particular robe or a particular way of dressing to be a Vedantist. But his whole life was lived in such an exceedingly dynamic meditative Vedanta that it touched people world over and in fact echoed the deepest message of the Upanishads. Also the deepest message of Gautam Buddha himself. Now, Gautam Buddha seems to some of us, or has been made to look to some of us, as if he's completely antithetical to the old Vedanta, but actually not. You see, there are many parallels. For example, the Aitreya Upanishad says Charayavati, Charayavati. So does Gautam Buddha. And his whole philosophy really is a crystallization of the highest truths of the Upanishads, but through his own mystical realization. And what I'm particularly concerned about is not the scholarly part of Vedanta, but the mystical realization of it, that which is lived through Krishnamurti and others. So you see, now to go to the ultimate depths, the ultimate meaningfulness of Vedanta, we must understand that it is firstly defined as the victory over the ego. That is the first principle of Vedanta. A victory over the ego. Not so much a victory over the ego as a dissolution of the ego. And in that very dissolution of the ego happens a sort of victory. That is the mystical warrior's path to Vedanta. And through that comes about true mukti, true moksha, true freedom, true godliness, and so on. That is the continual ecstasy of it. That is the very depth of it. And if you look at the trajectory of J. Krishnamurti's life, his whole life was a natural culmination of this search for the intense freedom from all markings. You see, Vedanta is about freedom. So if you're attached to an institution and you keep harping about Vedanta, it is actually somewhere, it is not really in consonance with the ultimate message of neti neti, of negation of Vedanta. So really it is the Avdut, it is the bold one who can walk alone, who truly echoes the energy that is Vedanta. And that is what J. Krishnamurti was. An ultimate world teacher in the Buddhist tradition called the Maitreya Buddha, the future manifestation of the Buddha after Gautam Buddha himself. One who created a friendliness, a vibe of friendliness within all beings. And that is the way of Krishnamurti. You see, the light of awareness kindled within the consciousness of human beings, but without being an intellectual exercise, an idea to bring a new dawn unto humanity, to change unconsciousness into consciousness, to change darkness into light. Tamsoma Jyotirgamaya. The movement toward a greater light of consciousness. Now, it doesn't matter that Krishnamurti spoke most of his content in English. You see, he spoke his content in English and not in Sanskrit, not in Hindi, simply because that was his fundamental role as a world traveler of Vedanta. So again, our over-insistence upon language and culture as such associated with Vedanta is actually a little superficial. You see, a Gorakhnath spoke in many languages. A Gorakhnath spoke in Sanskrit. A Gorakhnath spoke in the popular dialects of Prakrit in his day. He spoke in Bengali. Hasiba Kheliba Dhariba Dhyanam, an old form of Bengali. He spoke in Nepali. He is the patron saint of the Gurkhas. So really, Vedant implies a freedom from all these outer limitations. It is really an observation of one's own being acting and functioning within the world. A discovery, a self-discovery is the central focus. Everything else is absolutely to be left by the wayside. And in a way, it is all about our higher energies. Higher energies means those which transcend culture, language, conditioning, institutionalization, and all sorts of things like that. Those are not part of our higher energy. Our higher energy means our subtlemost energy, that which gives us the innermost glow, that which is not determined by somebody telling us what inner blissfulness means, what inner happiness means. No, it is a realization of that. And you see, it is a very strange thing that these particular masks we wear of belonging to a particular religion, of belonging to a particular culture, a creed, and so on. It's very strange that the first step on Vedanta is really a recognition that all this is bogus, all this is false, all this is truly pseudo, this is not the real path of Vedanta. But the irony is that a lot of teachers of Vedanta choose first to wear these markings of where they come from, who they are, what institution they belong to. The teacher of Vedanta needs to be an individual, first of all. That brings about the multidimensionality of phenomenon. In my own experience, it's been that a monodimensional interpretation of Vedanta is not good, coming from a particular institution, no matter which. No institution is greater than the higher truth. No institution is greater than the mystic. It is absolutely absurd to say that the institution is greater than the enlightened mystic, the Avdut, the realizer, the Rishi. No, it cannot be. The problem is Vedanta has got dominated by a particular way of looking at ascetic monks and so on. Well, that is one part of it, that is one tradition of it. But really, it is a mystical philosophy which is a vision, a broader vision of reality, which is available for all beings. So essentially, as Vivekananda used to say, the highest Christ consciousness would also involve a Vedantic realization. For example, me and my Father are one. Jesus of Nazareth says that. In a way, it echoes Aham Brahmasmi. So, at the highest reaches of spiritual paths, you'll find echoes of Vedanta, no matter what that spiritual path is. It could be Taoism, it could be Zenism, it could be Baal, it could be Kabbalah, it could be the Abrahamic religions, it could be the Aztec paths, it could be the pagan paths, any, that doesn't matter. It is about divine joy. It is about an initiation into a greater love affair with all that exists. That is the true sannyas. That is the true sannyas is what? Finding the higher source of bliss. That is the definition of sannyas in Vedanta, the higher Vedanta. All other sannyas is worldly. It's got to do with changing one's garments, changing one's clothes, and so on. And that is what Ashtavakra, the 12-year-old sage, rebukes Janak for. He says, you have all these pandits in your assembly, but it looks like none of them really know the truth. None of them speak of the higher consciousness, because they are more concerned with their power, their position, their particular markings with who they are, what their school of thought is, and so on. So Indian philosophy, the darshanas of India, they're not to be taken so literally as in, they're not to be taken as mistaken for the mystical part of it. They are more a scholarly part of it that has nothing to do with the intuitive realization of the higher reaches of Vedanta, which is essentially a silent communion, a silent communication with the infinite. And that is really the essence of what Krishnamurti taught all his life. You see, Krishnamurti's words were not the most important thing only, no. His very presence, his very aliveness, his very ability to move people around the world with this immense dynamo of subtle energy, spiritual energy that he had within him. That is the most remarkable thing. He seemed inexhaustible for 90 plus years of his life, doing things, traveling perhaps more than any human being has traveled, taking the message of the higher reality transcending the functioning of the conditioned mind, without needing to bring God into the whole picture, without needing to bring religious archetypes into the picture. And that's what the beauty of his whole teaching is. Immensely powerful, immensely, truly the sheer joy of interlocution between the teacher and a true satsang, without even calling it a satsang, a gathering of people. You see, the Upanishads mean sitting at the feet of the master. That's all they mean. They have no other religious connotation. Just simply means that. And Krishnamurti's gatherings were like that. They were a very non-hierarchical sort of interactions between people. And really what he did was, he tried to shake people out of this robot-like, automated, preconditioned, machine-like functioning within the world. Shake them out of that and move on to real awareness. And real awareness is exactly what Vedanta is. That is the very flower of it. That is the very essence of it. This whole sensitivity to life, that is the essence of Vedanta. That is its only religiousness. The essential core of religion is comprised not of language, not of words from a Sanskrit lexicon, no. It's comprised of a fundamental understanding that we are to be total in our actions. We are to have gratitude for this ability to be total in our actions. Through that, higher energy is realized. Through that, the higher reaches of Vedanta are realized. So you see, this is also what Krishna is telling Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. To be total in his action, not to hold back. And the totality for Arjuna means being a warrior. Totality for Arjuna means finding the entire music of the Bhagavad Gita through the joy of his skillfulness as a warrior. So even as a warrior, he is to fight in a state of bliss. And state of bliss happening through a realization, a higher awareness of that which lies beyond mind. That which lies in the pure realm of consciousness. Which is what Krishnamurti's whole effort was. His effort was to take us away and to watch the functioning of repetitive thoughts within our minds. And when you see that, then there's a disidentification with what you believed you were. Name, personality, designation, so on. And enter the innermost chambers of your inner being. And when you enter the innermost chambers of your inner being, you recognize a higher mathematics, a higher logic, a higher intuitive realization that you are a blissful part of a blissful infinity. And in that you flow. In that you become aware of an inner mechanics that transcends the mechanics of thought itself. So it's really to move away from the idea of imagination, from the idea of being past or future oriented, and let the consciousness become self-luminous. You see, self-luminousness is one of the most fundamental tenets of Hindu wisdom. It says that we are incandescent with a subtle light which is not dependent on something else. So what is the divine? The divine is that which does not need to have reflected light. The divine is that which is self-luminous. And that self-luminous ability of the Atman is one of the defining characteristics of soulful living. To find that. You don't need to. So therefore, it is really a search within the highest heights and the deeper depths, the deepest depths of the great luminosity of your inner being, which exists already. So in the Aham Brahmasmi state, you are already part of it. The microcosm is already a part of the macrocosm. There is no need to think otherwise. You are already a Buddha, you are already a realized being. Samadhi itself is the understanding that it is already within you. It is a recognition of your highest self. That makes you full of energy. And being full of energy is one of the most fundamental things of Vedanta. You see, Krishnamurti epitomized this. He was so full of energy in his own life that the attainment of Vedantic truth was always with him. And he was a very aesthetic person. He believed in personal upkeep to a very high degree. But really, it was a function of his wanting to be fit enough to be able to take the message to as many people as he did. To be able to be this immense singular individual dynamo who could take the highest reality of Indic thought, which is Vedanta in a way, to a broader audience and without couching it in the old jargon of Vedanta. You see, a lot of people get intimidated by this whole idea of Vedanta itself because it sounds a little intimidating. The subject sounds heavy. So Krishnamurti is to negate all this jargon, and he's to say that that is absolutely not required. But of course, it has its own beauty. But his way of teaching was a very courageous way. He relied on no crutches. Crutches are what? Crutches means we can keep talking, we can keep quoting from texts, we can keep quoting from Sanskrit lexicons, we can keep quoting other people. Those are crutches in a way. Those are not talking pure truth because you're relying on so-called scriptural knowledge. But Vedanta is actually the unsaid truth. It can never be contained within words as such. So it's like Lao Tzu says in the Tao Te Ching, the famous Taoist text of China. He says, that which can be stated as truth is not the truth anymore. So in a way, that is also true of Vedanta. And you have to remember, Vedanta is a mother, it's a parent to all these traditions of Taoism, Zenism, and so on. Ultimately, it's what? It's a spontaneous realization of your inner goodness, a spontaneous realization of your inner stillness, your quietness, your peacefulness within yourself. And this is exactly what Krishnamurti was trying to do. You see, at the heart of Krishnamurti's message was this message of stillness. Be inwardly still, be inwardly quiet, be inwardly peaceful, be inwardly a watcher. If you do all these things, you automatically move to that state, which is the state of higher Vedanta. And that is the real approach, which is free of the confines of a particular religion. And actually, Vedanta is free of the confines of everything. It is movement towards absolute mukti. Absolute mukti or absolute freedom. And absolute mukti means that you go beyond your conceptions of the known. So going beyond the conceptions of the known and going into the mystery of the unknown is a fundamental part of Krishnamurti's way. And it is a fundamental part of the Vedas themselves. You see, the Vedas, the Nasidhya Suktam and the Rig Veda, questions the idea of God. It talks about, an infinite regression. Before this existed, what existed? Before that existed, what existed? So it talks about an infinite regression, and it talks about how at the end, even that particular entity we call God, maybe he also doesn't know what was behind him, what was before him. So it's very interesting. That reflects the Vedantic idea. There are no absolutes as such. So you see, when we talk about the Brahman being an absolute, it is not absolute in that sense. It's a fixed frozen entity. No, it means that it is a portal to that which is part of infinity, which we are not able to understand fully. Hence we call it the absolute. It is endless, ashesh. So that which is Brahman is not supposed to be like a wall at the end and behind the wall there is nothing. No. It is more like an opening into vastness. And beyond that there is no end. And that is the kind of Brahman which Krishnamurti talks about without even calling it Brahman. A higher reality. The creative realization of the divine is moving towards higher and higher peaks. It's not about, climbing Mount Everest and saying, I've achieved it. I've achieved Brahman, I've achieved the peak, this is the highest which can be reached. Well, that's a very childish way. The peaks of Vedanta cannot ever be fully scaled. And that is the beauty of these old Indian paths. You see, Hindu wisdom talks about infinities beyond infinity. It talks about endless movement. So it's very open in its thinking. It's very broad in its thinking. And it does not talk about a very definite end. So, for example, even Ram tells Lakshman, he says, millions and millions of divine beings have come and gone. So things like that, these are part of the Yog Vashisht and different texts which define the essence of Vedanta. And this is what Krishnamurti was echoing in a way. But he was echoing it not from a particular polemical or a very argumentative sort of an attitude. No. He was echoing it from the deep state of inner silence which he had attained into. And his deep feeling for people, his empathy, his compassion for people, that was an essential part of his teaching. You see, the problem with belonging to an institution is that we have compassion for the institution. So the institution we put before other objects. So if I belong to a particular order of monks, for me that becomes very important. Ultimate truth can also be compromised sometimes. But really with Krishnamurti, because he chose not to belong to any institution beyond a certain point in his life, he remained free to be flowing into higher reality. He remained free to be on an endless search for that which is higher without getting caught up in this whole dynamics of which institution is right, identifying with a particular institution. See, no institution is ultimately correct, because an institution is an artificial creation of mankind. It's not Prakriti, it's not nature. So it does not echo ultimate truth. At the most, it can be a small reflection of a particular limited truth. It is not equal to the mystical realization of the highest. So we have to understand that belonging to a particular tradition may be good. So yes, there are traditions which we should belong to as Indians and so on. But ultimately, Vedanta means going beyond traditions also. So the realized rishi or the person of samadhi is a person who's able to go beyond the traditions of so-called knowledge dissemination, Gyan, Vigyan dissemination, and so on. So a person of samadhi is a person who's able to move beyond the conditioned traditions of particular institutionalized ways of looking at knowledge systems. Then only does the knowledge system have greater beauty, greater depth, and that is the heart of Vedanta. Yes, it does belong to the tradition of Hindu wisdom, but in a way it's a gift of Hindu wisdom to the world. And that gift has to be freely shared without us trying to monopolize it as part of an institution and so on. So this is very important to understand. And this is what Krishnamurti did very effectively in his life. He bridged the ancient and the new. And he realized that the bridging the ancient and new realizes a new syntax, a new vocabulary, a new mode of expression without getting caught up in the old modes of expression. You see, civilization is a dynamic process. Civilization, culture, they don't remain the same. They evolve in their own particular way, sometimes not in a very good way, but that's the reality of life. So you have to transcend these waves of civilizational change. And the only way to do that is to move beyond the old ways of doing things. Else you'll be caught up. You'll be caught up in a very narrow sense of what that philosophy means. And Vedanta means an unlimited philosophy. It means an unlimited mystical vision of life. A vision of the greater, the more beautiful, the vaster, and so on. It is an infinity of doorways to ultimate truth. That is a very good definition of Vedanta. And that is what Krishnamurti was concerned with. He was concerned with the ultimate truth itself, not so much a defense of a particular spiritual path. Our ultimate concern in life should be what it is. It's not about belonging to a particular creed and so on. That should not be the whole point. The whole point should be attaining to a higher consciousness, and that is what the teachings of the rishis were all about. So the teachings of the rishis, the teachings of the Avadhut, they are very clear about this, that you have to move towards higher consciousness, and in that higher consciousness, not only does your fear of things disappear, but your over-identification with things also disappears. Your over-identification with who you are, what culture you belong to, what institution you are attached with, and so on. That is the hidden treasure of Vedanta. So it is a great laboratory of life upon which you are to understand that the path of bliss is the ultimate product of the experiments that you're doing in that laboratory. And that path of bliss means a path which takes you away from all conditioned feelings about what that path is. It is basically moving beyond those overly intellectualized knowledge systems that have filled your mind with particular words, with particular connotations of what those words mean, and really coming to a state of innocence where the highest truth is realized. So in Vedanta, one thing is very important. Innocence, this is going back to a childlike realization of the higher truth. Without that, you remain a conditioned carrier of particular institutionalized or knowledge systems. So this idea of what in Zen Buddhism has been called the new mind, the fresh mind, the ability to look at things fresh, the way a child would look at life, innocent, without too much baggage of knowledge, that is the way of the Vedantically realized sage, the person of Samadhi. That is the way of the true meditator of Vedanta. And Krishnamurti was really trying to do that with people. He was trying to tell people to shed the baggage of conditioning, just as the trees shed their leaves. And then only is renewal and understanding possible. Without shedding the baggage, nothing is possible. So it's like the cycle of nature. You see, the nature itself moves through a cycle of seasons. So for spring to come anew, the tree will have to be denuded of its foliage, of its leaves and so on, in the autumn and the winter. Otherwise, the newness of realization does not dawn. And remember, Vedanta is all about newness. It's all about freshness. It's all about a miraculously new vision of existence. Suddenly finding a new way of looking at life itself, a new way of looking at the universe itself. That is the miracle of Vedanta. That is what brings creativity, and that is what is able to take us to a recognition of a creator whose creativity is still going on in this world. You see, our ideas about God are somebody who created the world and then is taking a rest almost. But in the Vedantic sense, creativity is inherent in life itself. It's inherent in creation itself. Each moment is a creative moment. Our very ability as a planet that is hurtling across space around the sun, to be able within this very, very miraculous and precarious existence to be able to feel love, gratitude, beauty, bliss, to recognize this miracle is the dawn of Vedantic wisdom. It has less to do with the realization of that which is given in books, no. It has more to do with realization of that energy which makes us look afresh at the world. And that is what Krishnamurti's entire effort was, to look at the world not in a split, fragmentary way, but to look at the world in an organic whole way. And that is the vision of Vedanta. Else our mind is continuously split. It's fragmented between our different identities in the world, our ideas of religion, our ideas of our standing in society, and so on and so forth. The Vedantic view is an organic, integrated view, where all is looked at with the singular oneness of awareness. So it's a crystallization of your consciousness and awareness into this integrated, immensely passionate energy full of light, a luminous light which has the power to light up not only your own life, but your entire way of looking at things. and moving towards that which has been described as samadhi, which has been described as the highest truth realization. And that is what Krishnamurti endeavored through his whole life. You see, think of the man. Late into his old age, he kept endeavoring. He kept trying to make human beings come out of our superficial ways of identification with the narrow and move on to a freedom of being. That is his ultimate message, and that is also the ultimate message of Vedanta itself.